Hey, good morning. Today's Daf Yomi is Moed Katan, Chav Zayin, Moed Katan 27, and we're going to start on 26b, around 13 lines from the bottom. So the Talmud says, Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Hayotze, the Beged Karua, somebody wants to, if somebody, you're required to tear your garment. But let's say the person already has a torn garment, and so there's a dead body, and they go outside and they're just wearing their torn garment. Hareze gozo as a mason. Such a person is stealing from the dead because he's not actually tearing his garment for the dead body because it's already torn. And he's also stealing from the living. Why is he stealing from the living? Because he's tricking them into thinking that he was so pious that he tore his garment. Rashun Gamliel says, somebody says to a person, let me borrow your cloak, your shirt, and I want to go and visit my father. My father is sick. And under those circumstances, amazed, and then he goes and he finds that his father's actually has passed away. Then Korea Uma'acho. Since his friend knew he was sick when he asked to borrow the garment, since his friend knew his father was sick, therefore he's allowed to tear the garment, and afterwards he can hem it. When he comes back to his house, he gives back the garment to his friend. He returns it to him, and he gives him the money for the tear, the depreciation or the diminishing value of the shirt because it was torn and then it was sewn up. But let's say you borrow the shirt and you don't tell him you're going to visit your father who's sick. You just tell him, can I borrow your shirt? And then you get there and you see your father has passed away. Then what do you have to do? You're not allowed to touch the shirt. You're not allowed to tear it. Why can't you tear it? Because this was not yours. And you didn't tell him that you're going to visit somebody who was sick, and so therefore you're not allowed to tear the garment. If you did tear the garment, you might have to tear another garment because this is what's called a mitzvah b'aver. It's a mitzvah that came as a result of a sin. You were stealing by tearing his garment without his permission. Rabbis taught, let's say you're sick, and if let's say a person is sick and a relative of his dies, you don't tell him about it. Maybe this person will get sicker because when somebody finds out that somebody dies, it breaks the heart, literally, physically. And so therefore, you don't tell this person. It's the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. You don't tell a sick person that somebody's died. You don't tear your garment in front of him. And if there are women who are mourning and wailing, you quiet them. Katan. That's the next halacha. But anyway, we see from here, if somebody is sick, you don't tell them that they lost a loved one because that could, God forbid, cause them to die. And if there's a minor, we tell the minor to tear so that other people around him will feel the pain. The agmas nefesh of those people around him. If your father-in-law or mother-in-law die, you're supposed to tear your garments along with your wife out of honor for your wife. Rav Papa said we learned in Abel Rabati. It's a collection of sources about laws of mourning. Because a mourner is prohibited in simcha and joy, then a mourner is not supposed to be walking around with the baby in their arms. That's going to give you so much joy. That's going to cause the other people to be upset with you. They're going to think that you're not honoring properly the laws of mourning. The aim of Aaron Amitas Zekufos, that we have a concept that you're supposed to do a Sudas Havara, which is what? That it's the first meal when you come back from the Levaya. Some say it's all the meals the first day of the funeral. Some say it's just that initial first meal. And that meal is supposed to be provided from neighbors. So we say that meal is not supposed to take place on a mita zekufa, on an upright bed, but rather on a bed that's turned over. Mita kafuya. Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught, let's say you go to visit the mourner, if you're very close with the person sitting shiva, you're very close, Yivru al mitas kfios. Then you eat with him on an overturned bed. Yivru al mitas kufos. If you're not so close with him, you're just a friend. Then you eat on regular beds that are not overturned. Rabbi Isra Bey Milsa means he lost a relative. Gabe Abba Bar Marta, Gabe Abba Bar Menyume. So Abba Bar Marta, that was his mother's name, but he's also known as Abba Bar Menyume. Some speculate that he was called Abba, the son of Marta, because his mother saved his life after he was bit by a dog. The Gemara in Yoma tells us that at the end of Yoma. So he came to visit him. Rava Zakif. Rava turned the bed over. He's like, we're not so close that we should eat on an overturned bed. Abba Bar Marta copy. Abba Bar Marta turned the bed back over. Amar Rava said, Kama leis bedaito atzur b'meirabanan. He insulted. He said, look, these young Torah scholars, they don't understand the law anymore. He's supposed to eat it with me on an upright bed because he's not so close with me. Somebody's traveling from one place to another, and then he hears about the loss of a relative. We're on the top of 27a. If he's able to diminish his business, he should diminish it. Otherwise, he should continue to go around with these people and do business as part of the whole group. At what point do you overturn the beds? Really, the question is, at what point does your Shiva start? Because the overturning of the beds was the sign that the Shiva was starting. So at what point? So the one answer is, Mishiyatsu in Pesach Pesach. Rabbi Eliezer says, from when you leave the Pesach, from when the dead body leaves the entrance to the house, that's when the Shiva starts. Because you're not going to be involved with the body anymore. So your Shiva should start at that point. Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yeshua says no, from when the cemetery is sealed, meaning to say when the grave is sealed, when they place the rock on top of the grave. They used to have like a space. They would put the body into a crypt and then they'll cover with a rock. So there was an incident when Rabbi Gamliel Zaken died, once the body left the house, Rabbi Eliezer said to the people back in the house, cover over your beds, you're in mourning now. But once the stone covered the crypt, Rabbi Yeshua said to the members of his Rabbi Gamliel's family, turn over your bed, start your Shiva. They said to him, we already listened to Rabbi Eliezer, we already listened to the elder, he's spoken. At what point do you turn over the beds, i.e., at what point do you make the beds upright? When it's the eve of Shabbos. Means say, what time can you get up from Shiva on the eve of Shabbos? So the answer is from the Mincha prayer onwards. Nevertheless, even though you could turn over the beds at that point, you can't. Your Shiva doesn't end on Erev Shabbos until Shabbos. So therefore, you don't sit on the upright beds until Shabbos. You can do preparations for Shabbos, but your Shiva is not over just because it's Friday afternoon. Shabbos, and on Saturday night, and on Saturday night, even though he only has one more day to sit, he goes back and he turns over his beds one more time. Somebody who overturns his bed, he's not only overturning his bed, he turns over so he turns over all the beds in his entire house. Even if he has 10 beds in 10 places, and he turns over all of them. Even if he has 5 brothers and one of them dies, then he's going to turn over all the beds. And if he has a bed that is designated for clothing, then he doesn't have to turn it over because this is a bed that's not for sitting on, that's for clothing. Dargash, we're going to see what it is in a moment. It's a special bed. It's an unusual bed. You don't need to turn it over. Keep it upright. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Dargash, matir es karbitav. For a dargash, you just release the straps that are in the middle of it, and the bed falls apart. So what is this dargash? My dargash. What is this dargash? Amar Ula Arsa Degada. Ula says it's a good luck bed. That's how Rashi, the printed Rashi translates. It's a good luck bed that people keep around like a good luck charm. Amar Rabbi El Me'ata. If that's the case, it's just a good luck bed. What about by a king? Gavi Melech, by a king, where we know the dargash appears in this sugya appears in the Dharma and Sanhedrin. We know by a king. Koam. There it states. Koam the subim al. It's everybody's sitting on the ground. Dargash, and the king's sitting on the bed. Mika Midi, this is during Shiva. Mika Midi, is it really possible? Up until now, nobody sits on the bed. And now during Shiva, you're going to start sitting on this bed? Doesn't make sense. So that proves that Dargash can't be this unique bed that was a good luck bed. So Maska for Ravashi challenges what Rabbah said. He says, what are you talking about? My kushya. What kind of challenge is this? Let's compare it to eating or drinking, where you're supposed to feed food and drink to the king. Up until today, nobody gave him food or drink. Now we're going to start feeding him food and drink? Yeah, because he's in mourning. That's also the case. Why he sits on the dargash. So Gemara says, this is the challenge. Titania, Dargash, Dargash, you don't need to overturn, you keep it straight up. And if it's this very special bed, that's a good luck bed, you should have to turn it over. Hatanan or Hatanya, we learned that kofa mitaso, bovadu kofel kol mitosh yeshal b'toch beso kofa. You turn over all the beds in your house. So even though it's an arsa de gada, you should still have to turn over the dargash. And Mar says, my kushya, that's not a challenge. Maybe the dargash is compared to a bed that's set aside for clothing. If it was a bed that's set aside for clothing, then you don't need to turn it over. And if this is a challenge here, this is the challenge. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, Dargash marti or karbita v'nofel me'olam. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, for the dargash, you just release its straps and it falls in. And if you think it's this good luck bed, my karbita say it has no straps, because since it's a fixed, this is how the Ritva explains it, since it's a fixed bed and it never moves around, therefore you don't need the straps. The straps were used for adjusting. So therefore, it can't be that that's what it is. So it can't be that this dargash is this arch sadagada. So Kiyasa Ravin, they have this rabbi whose name was Rav Tachlifa from Eretz Yisrael, and he used to hang around in the leather markets. He says, my dargash arsa datzila. He says this is a leather bed, meaning to say, this is the type of bed the commentaries explain that noblemen would take with them when they traveled from one place to another, like a cot that you could easily assemble and disassemble. In Marnami Rabbi Yirmiyah, dargash serugo mitocho mita serugo agabav. The dargash, the straps are on the sides, whereas the mita regular bed, the straps are on the top. And Rabbi Yaakov Baracham, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, laws like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, i.e., that you're supposed to just release the dargash, the straps, and it falls in on its own. In Marnami Rabbi Yaakov Baracham, Rabbi Yasi, mita shenaklita yotzin. Let's say you have a bed that it has two posts on either end, and with a blanket over it at the top, like a tent, like a simple army-style tent. So under those circumstances, you can't turn it over because it won't stand. So just put it on, like straight up this way. Instead of it flipping like that, you should put it straight up, and that'll be sufficient. Tana Rabbana Yashin al Gabe Kisa. Let's say a person says, I'm just going to sleep on a chair, Agabe Onaya, Gedor, a piece of mortar, Agabe Karakor on the ground. Well, you haven't fulfilled your obligation. There has to be, you see, it's about a sign. You turn over the bed, it's like a sign. And everybody could walk into the room and know that you're mourning, and that's why you're turning over the beds. You say this a little bit by somebody sits on a low chair for a shiva. You have to turn, it's the sign. You have to let people know that this is different. It's not a regular type of sitting. This is a difference. There's a difference in how you're sitting. So, and what's the reason? It says Rabbi Yochanan Shalkim Kfiyas Amita. He hasn't fulfilled the obligation of turning over the bed. You're allowed to clean up, you're allowed to sweep and wash the floor in the house of a mourner. We're allowed to wash the cups, the bowls, the plates, the jugs in the house of the mourner. You're not allowed to bring spices and these sweet smelling incense to the house of a mourner. So the Gemara asks, what is second? Is that really the case? Tani bar kapara. Bar kapara taught you don't make a bracha or a mugmar not on the spices or the incense. So in the house of the mourner, and that just means you don't make a blessing. But you are allowed to bring them in. So the Gemara says, no. One is in the house of the Avel. Ritva explains that means the house where there's still a dead body. So then, you need to bring the spices to cover up the smell. It decompose very quickly. But in the base of Menachem, in the place where people are being comforted, and then there's no body anymore. So then, under those circumstances, you're not allowed to bring the spices to the house of a mourner. Says the Gemara in Tanarabana. We're up to the Mishnah. Tanan. We don't bring food to the house of the mourner. Now with these fancy bowls, these fancy baskets, just in a very simple basket. We'll see why in the Gemara. You don't say the blessing of the mourners on Chol Moed. You stand in a line. You comfort the mourners. You send everybody home. You don't put the coffin in the street. We don't want to get the people too accustomed to the eulogy. And because, meaning say during Chol Moed, we don't want to put the coffin in the street because we don't want there to be a eulogy for people to start giving eulogies during Chol Moed. And we also never put the woman's coffin in the street because of honor for her. We'll see why in a moment. Tana Rabban and the rabbis taught Barishona at first. At first, when they would go to the mourner's house, there's two ways to read this. Either, let me read the words. The wealthy people had very fancy baskets made out of silver and gold, and the poor people had just simple wicker baskets. So there's two ways to read it, and both ways are found in our sources. One way is when you visit the poor person's house for Shiva, people used to bring them food in very fancy baskets. When you went to the wealthy person's home, they would bring them food in very fancy baskets. When you went to the poor person's home, it was in very simple baskets. Alternatively, you could say when the poor people brought the food, they brought it in simple baskets, and the wealthy people brought it in very fancy baskets. Anyway, it was very clear that during the Shiva became, the disparities in wealth became very clear, and the rabbis were not comfortable with this because the poor people were embarrassed. We were discussing this last night. Why in here did the rabbis care so much about making sure that everybody acted properly? People feel especially embarrassed about funerary practices, not to embarrass the poor, because we would think that the great equalizer is in heaven after you die, and so to be flaunting that difference, then it doesn't bode well for anybody. So therefore, the rabbis established they said everybody has to bring it in these simple wicker baskets that have the honor for the poor. Barishona, I just said that. Barishona. At first, when they would give people to drink in the mourner's home, they would do it they would give them to drink if they were wealthy in white glass, which was very expensive, and the poor people in colored glass, which was very poor, which was for the poor, very inexpensive. And then aniyim especially, the poor people were very embarrassed. So they made a takana that everybody's going to drink in colored glass on account of the honor for the poor. At first, when they would bury somebody, they would uncover the face of the wealthy people who died, and they would cover the faces of the poor. Because the poor people, their faces were ghastly looking, because of the famine. And the poor people were very embarrassed. Oh, if I'm poor, my face is covered. So they established every face is covered. So to this day, a Jewish funeral, you don't uncover the body. The face is covered. And out of the honor for the poor. At first, he used to take out the wealthy people on a dargash. Here, dargash doesn't mean this fancy bed we were talking about, but here it just means a fancy coffin. And we're on top of 27b. The poor people went out in a kuicha, i.e., just a regular coffin, funeral beer. The poor people were very embarrassed. So they established that everybody should go out with the kuicha, with this type of regular funeral bed. So not to embarrass the poor. At first, they would place the spices under the intestines of somebody who was sick, who died while they were from an intestinal illness. So they would place the spices from somebody who died from an intestinal illness. So the people who died from who were sick, but they hadn't yet died yet, but they were sick with this intestinal illness, were very embarrassed that, when we die, we're going to get this spicy treatment. So they made a takana that they put the spices under everybody, so as to give honor to those who were, just not to embarrass those who had this intestinal illness. And first, if there was a woman who was in nida and she died, they used to take anything she touched, all the clothing, and they would immerse them because she had touched it before she died, and she can transmit tumah through touch on clothing. But then what happened was, the women who were nidos when they were alive were very embarrassed. They said, that's going to show we died in this way, and we're treated like lepers, basically. So what did they do? Is they said we're gonna immerse everyone's clothing, all nidos. We're gonna immerse all the women's clothing. So it's not to embarrass those women who were in nida when they died. At first, if a man had this flow from his member, at first they would immerse anything he touched. But Zav and Chaim is Baishin, but then the men who were alive, and they were embarrassed. So they established that all men's clothing after they died were immersed in the mikvah. So at first, when a person died, back at a certain time, the money on the funeral was harder on the family more than the actual death, because they had to spend so much money on the funeral. So it was worse than the death. It was like a double whammy. You lost the person, and now how are you going to pay for the funeral? What happened? What happened was, the relatives left him, and then they ran away. Meaning they dropped the body off and they ran away. Who was the Nasi, he was one of the wealthiest people in the whole community. What did he do? No, Kal is Rosh or Kal. There's different versions. He acted lightly on his own honor. That's Mo. The odds of the Pishin, and he said, "I'm going to be buried in linen shrouds." And that's why everybody to this day is buried in Pishin, in these shrouds. And today people are buried, says Rav Papa, in this simple canvas clothing that's worth a zuz. To this day, Klal Yisrael has the strong custom, to be buried in white shrouds, white simple linen shrouds. And so therefore, if anybody tries to bury you in something else, don't let them. You're not allowed to leave the coffin in the street on Moed, because that'll encourage other people to give long eulogies. On Moed, you're not supposed to have eulogies. But when there's a Torah scholar, we don't celebrate the Moed, means to say we give him a eulogy. And by Salvechik was niftar on Moed. So, but he did have a eulogy from his brother. One of his brother gave a eulogy of Aaron Soloveitchik. That was it. So, also on Chanukah and Purim, you give eulogies for the Torah scholar. That's only when he's there. When the mace is not there, well, when the dead body is not there, you don't give a eulogy. Yes, the Gemara is it's really the case of Rav Kahana Savta or Rav Zvid in Aradai, but Pum Nahara. Rav Kahana gave a eulogy for Rav Zvid in Pum Nahara. Amar Papi Yom Shmua Have. Our Papi says no, it was the day of the he heard it. We could be fun of dummy, and since it was the day he heard it, it was like he was there. Amar Ua Hesped Alev. Hesped, the eulogy refers to something either that speaks to the heart, maybe you are striking the heart. On the breasts or on the chest, you're eulogizing. Tipuach, the expression of tipuach means biyad. That means with the hand. Kilus is an expression of mourning berega with the foot. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbi said, "Amakalis besandal." If you're mourning with your foot, don't do it if you're wearing what they call a sandal. Which type of shoe? Oh, b'mino, with a different type of shoe, because it's dangerous to use the sandal. The Gemara explains because what's going to happen is the sandal could flip over. This type of shoe that we just call the sandal, it could flip over and you could break your leg. So that's what could happen. I don't exactly see. Rashi says v'shov v'rago, but I don't exactly see why the sandal is different than the nalayim. We'd have to really know the difference between the sandal and the shoe in order to understand why one presented a threat and the other didn't. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Avel Kivan Shani Na Rosho Shuvei Menachem. Once the mourner nods his head to the comforter, saying it's time to go, then you don't comfort him anymore. Shuvei Menachem Rishon Leishav Etzlo. They're not allowed to sit next to him. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Akol Chayav Amov Bnei Nasi. If the prince of the community comes in, everybody has to get up, except for the mourner and the sick person. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yochanan says to everybody, you tell them to sit, except for a mourner and a sick person. So someone explained this to me that he's saying shvus, that could be understood. We want you to remain as a mourner, so therefore you don't say that to him. Because the word shev could be like shvu, stay in your mourning. Others say no. What it means is you don't need to say it to them because they never stood up in the first place. So therefore you don't have to tell them to sit. The mourner on the first day is not allowed to eat his own bread because they have to bring him the food. Because God says to Ezekiel, you're not allowed to eat the bread of people on the first day. Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef when they had the funeral, Rabbi and Rabbi Yosef would exchange food with each other. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, I'm Rabbi Yehuda, Mace Be'ir. If there's a dead body in the city, Kol B'nei Ha'ir, all the people in the city, Asur Masiyas Malacha. They're not allowed to do any work. They have to care for the dead body. But when there was an incident, Rav Hamnuna Drumta. Rav Hamnuna came to the place called Drumta. Shama Kol Shipura. He heard the sound of the shofar, the shikva, that somebody had died. Chaza Hanach Inchi the Ka'avdi Avidita. He saw it, but yet he saw that people were still going to work, even though somebody died. He says, put these people in excommunication. Isn't there a death in the city? They said, no, we have a Chevra Kadisha. We have a body of people that deals with funerals. Today is Zayin Adar. This is the day where the Chevra Kadishas in the Jewish world are celebrated for their dedication, their holy dedication to this very, very important task of burial. That's what we have. We have a Chevra Kadisha. We don't have to do it. He said, he says, you know what? If that's the case, then indeed it's going to be permitted for you to not go to the Levaya and to deal with the dead body. All right. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address them. If anybody has any